a stable democracy with a high standard of living, and until recently, extremely low unemployment and government debt.
We had the complete infrastructure of a modern society. Clean energy, food production, fisheries, with a quota system to manage them.
Good healthcare, good education, clean air, not much crime. It's a good place for families to live.
We had almost end of history status.
But in 2000, Iceland's government began a broad policy of deregulation that would have disastrous consequences. First for the environment, and then for the economy. They started by allowing multinational corporations like Alcoa to build giant aluminum smelting plants and exploit Iceland's natural geothermal and hydroelectric energy sources.
Many of the most beautiful areas in the Highlands, with the most spectacular colors, are geothermal. So nothing comes without consequence.
At the same time, the government privatized Iceland's 3 largest banks. The result was one of the purest experiments in financial deregulation ever conducted.
Finance took over and more or less wrecked the place.
In a 5-year period, these 3 tiny banks, which had never operated outside of Iceland, borrowed $120 billion, 10 times the size of Iceland's economy. The bankers showered money on themselves, each other, and their friends.
There was a massive bubble. Stock prices went up by a factor of 9. House prices more than doubled.
Iceland's bubble gave rise to people like Jan Asgeir Jóhannesson. He borrowed billions from the banks to buy up high-end retail businesses in London. He also bought a pinstriped private jet, a $40 million yacht, and a Manhattan penthouse.
This company, in the UK or in Finland or in France or wherever, instead of saying this millionaire took $1 billion loan to buy this company and he took it from your local bank.
The banks set up money market funds, and the banks advised deposit holders to withdraw money and put them in the money market funds. The Ponzi scheme needed everything it could.
American accounting firms like KPMG audited the Icelandic banks and investment firms and found nothing wrong. And American credit rating agencies said Iceland was wonderful.
In February 2007, the rating agency decided to upgrade the banks to the highest possible rate, AAA.
It went so far as the government here, traveling with the bankers as a PR show.
When Iceland's banks collapsed at the end of 2008, unemployment tripled in 6 months.
There is nobody unaffected in Iceland.
So a lot of people here lost their savings.
Yes, that's the case.
The government regulators who should have been protecting the citizens of Iceland had done nothing.
You have 2 lawyers from the regulator going down to a bank to talk about some issue. When they approached the bank, they would see 19 SUVs outside the bank. Right? So you enter the bank and you have the 19 lawyers sitting in front of you, right? Very, very well prepared, ready to kill any argument you make. And then if you do really well, they'll offer you a job, right?
If you have money in a US bank account that you think is insured by the FDIC, you might just want to watch this video quite closely because there's been some pretty disturbing news out recently. We could say it was leaked in there, and if you want the short version because you don't want to watch the entire video, well, it transpires that your funds may not be covered after all. In fact, only around 1.3% of all insured funds now have liquidity behind them. So there's the short version.
I think you've got to think of the unintended consequences of taking a public that has more full faith and confidence in the banking system than understand they can be bailed in, but you don't want a huge run on the institution. But they're going to be. You can tell whether people understand who's going to be protected, who isn't going to be protected. It would be, I think, an interesting study to look at the evolution of market prices in a situation like March of 2020, for example, and see whether people understood what might happen.
Okay, so what they're basically talking about there, this is how crazy it is that they just throw it out there like this, is that firstly in March of 2020, the banking system almost collapsed. And that wouldn't have just been in the USA, that would have been globally because of the US dollar, world reserve currency, etc., etc. Now, what also happened quite recently, it was only a few months back now, maybe 2 or 3 months back, was that the Bank of England also almost collapsed, which would have had a contagious effect on the rest of the world, the rest of the banking sector. Because you've got to bear in mind, all of the banks now are so interconnected globally that when one of them has a major issue, all of them will also have issues that are connected to it. So I made that video on the Bank of England and what actually happened there. The pension funds almost collapsed. There were margin calls. The usual players were behind that, BlackRock, etc. So because the pension funds are so highly leveraged and they're trying to get such high returns now because of this inverted pyramid we have. We don't have a pyramid like this anymore. It's now inverted. So what does that mean? It means that you've got more retirees here collecting the money from the pensions than you have workers at the bottom. Whereas previously it was more workers and more retirees. That was how it was supposed to be done. So there's a lot of issues now, and again, there's videos on the channel about pensions. Is your pension protected? Yes, right now, but potentially not in the future. And there's a lot of these warnings coming out now, not just from people like myself who have been talking about this for a good 3 or 4 years, but also leading professors of economics from Harvard University and Nobel Prize winners and all this sort of stuff. The message is getting across. These people are also starting to warn about it. And we've got a warning on this video as well. I'll bring that article up about this contagion that might happen. But you heard about in the series, the Great Depression Diary series, of what they did the last time. And I actually think they're going to do the exact same thing again. I will make a video on the central bank digital currency and how I think this will come about. But it's going to be very similar. And what actually happened was, and you remember the bank manager telling his best friend, oh, no, nothing to worry about. We'll see you on Monday and you can get your money out. No need to join the long lines and all this sort of thing. And then what happened, all the banks of the entire nation closed for a brief bank holiday on the Monday. Yeah, well, we know what happened after that. The banks didn't reopen again. Everyone lost their money. So where did this whole bail-in thing come from then in the first place? And why now? Again, we'll get on to the numbers in a moment to prove that the FDIC will not cover you in a collapse situation. We'll come to that in a moment. Where did this come from? Well, it came from the International Monetary Fund, which I refer to as the International Mafia Fund because of what they do in developing nations, basically holding the people to ransom and keeping them in poverty, even though that might come as a surprise to many of you because they advertise the complete opposite, that they're there to help these countries get out of poverty. Well, they created this staff discussion note almost a decade ago now to the day, so April 24th, 2012, and it was called From Bailout to Bail-In. Mandatory, we looked at this word yesterday, didn't we? Debt restructuring of systemic financial institutions. So it talks about, in detail, here we go here, so what is a bail-in and why do we need bail-in? Well, I'll save you a good couple of hours of reading here. The reason they said we need bail-in is because we can't bail out again. There was too much public outcry, there was too many problems the last time. The government probably won't be able to do it this time around because they're too leveraged themselves. And they are. If you look at governments now, and you look at their debt to GDP level, it is unheard of in peacetime. I mean, we haven't seen debt to GDP since World War II and earlier. I mean, these levels are so extreme now. I've said a number of times, I'll say it again, I personally don't think the US debt can ever be repaid now. I think it's just too far gone.
The system, which was cited by Barack Obama in order to actively avoid the the obligations from previous promises by the banking systems and financial industries in general, have an obligation of the faith and good, the credit and good faith of the American government to pay off all of its liabilities, which is the foundation of the dollar, which has evolved from the petrodollar as the mechanism requires the, I think was fractal banking, I believe it is. Basically, they print money in order to engage in the excess increase of the quantity of the currency for inflation, which is mitigated against the increase of prospect businesses. I think it's called the modern monetary banking system. But basically, that system requires the faith and good efforts of the credit and honor of the American government in order to sustain itself as the central currency in the world, at which point you have the mechanism which is constantly being eroded as they compound lies upon lies upon lies in their criminal wizard communist scenario, which exclusively is based upon defrauding the general public by the white-collar component of the military strategy of being funded by the black market, which requires the perpetual application of suckers or those who would fund criminal enterprises. So marijuana being criminalized would increase them as opposed to it being derived by the legislator paying them, at which point their ability to engage in the criminal enterprise requires the existence of the crime in order for them to acquire the non-legislative permitted currencies or dark money held in their black accounts, at which point you have the protected criminal syndicates, which are actively the resources of their criminal wars, such as the Mexican cartels in California, which have actively been threatening the locals, such as the stealing of water in order to increase their grow sites, which is actively protected by the Confederate terrorist insurrection, derived as an extent of unitary executive theory, which gives them permission to assassinate presidents on the basis of plausible deniability, which is the diffusement of authority from the president illegally under the Confederate interest to overthrow the republic and the disillusionment of all rule of law, at which point these compounding threats exponentially destroy everyone in an unavoidable coercive relationship, which cannot be retaliated against, as all remedies are systematically dissolved for the specific interest of generating chattel slavery or serfdom under a feudalist structure, as they create the factions of splitting the general society into a multiple diverse group of people who will constantly engage in infighting, controlled by the central brokerage wizard terrorists in the Confederate arrangements, who engage in messing with the enemy techniques from the military against the American public, as they systematically eat each other, and that way they can automate the Nazi program to destroy all political opposition by the use of all other political opposition.
Prior to the crisis,
I was getting a lot of anonymous emails from bankers saying, "You can't quote me, but I'm really concerned."
Why do you think there isn't a more systematic investigation being undertaken?
Because then you'll find the culprits.
Do you think that Columbia Business School has any significant conflict of interest problem?
Don't say that we do.
The regulators didn't do their job. They had the power to do every case that I made when I was state attorney general. They just didn't want it.
annonce clairement la couleur.
In September 2008, the bankruptcy of the U.S. investment bank Lehman Brothers and the collapse of the world's largest insurance company, AIG, triggered a global financial crisis.
Gripped markets overnight with Asian stocks
fell off a cliff, the largest single point drop in history.
Share prices continued to tumble in the aftermath of the Lehman collapse.
The result was a global recession, which cost the world tens of trillions of dollars, rendered 30 million people unemployed, and doubled the national debt of the United States.
If you look at the cost of it, destruction of equity wealth, of housing wealth, the destruction of income, of jobs, 15 million people globally could end up below the poverty line again. This is just a hugely expensive crisis.
This crisis was not an accident. It was caused by an out-of-control industry. Since the 1980s, the rise of the U.S. financial sector has led to a series of increasingly severe financial crises. Each crisis has caused more damage, while the industry has made more and more money. After the Great Depression, the United States had 40 years of economic growth without a single financial crisis. The financial industry was tightly regulated. Most regular banks were local businesses, and they were prohibited from speculating with depositors' savings. Investment banks, which handled stock and bond trading, were small private partnerships.
In the traditional investment banking partnership model, the partners put the money up, and obviously the partners watched that money very carefully. They wanted to live well, but they didn't want to bet the ranch on anything.
Paul Volcker served in the Treasury Department and was chairman of the Federal Reserve from 1979 to 1987. Before going into government, he was a financial economist at Chase Manhattan Bank.
When I left Chase to go in the Treasury in 1969, I think my income was in the neighborhood of $45,000 a year.
$45,000 a year.
Morgan Stanley in 1972 had approximately 110 total personnel, one office, and capital of $12 million. Now, Morgan Stanley has 50,000 workers and has capital of several billion and has offices all over the world.
In the 1980s, the financial industry exploded. The investment banks went public, giving them huge amounts of stockholder money. People on Wall Street started getting rich.
I had a friend who was a bond trader at Merrill Lynch in the 1970s. He had a job as a train conductor at night because he had 3 kids and couldn't support them on what a bond trader made. By 1986, he was making millions of dollars and thought it was because he was smart.
In 1981, President Ronald Reagan chose as Treasury Secretary the CEO of the investment bank Merrill Lynch, Donald Regan.
Wall Street and the president do see eye to eye. I've talked to many leaders of Wall Street. They all say we're behind the president 100%.
The Reagan administration, supported by economists and financial lobbyists, started a 30-year period of financial deregulation. In 1982, the Reagan administration deregulated savings and loan companies, allowing them to make risky investments with their depositors' money. By the end of the decade, hundreds of savings and loan companies had failed. Hundreds of savings and loan companies had failed. This crisis cost taxpayers $124 billion and cost many people their life savings.
It may be the biggest bank heist in our history.
Thousands of savings and loan executives went to jail for looting their companies. One of the most extreme cases was Charles Keating.
You got a word?
In 1985, when federal regulators began investigating him, Keating hired an economist named Alan Greenspan. In this letter to regulators, Greenspan praised Keating's sound business plans and expertise and said he saw no risk in allowing Keating to invest his customers' money. Keating reportedly paid Greenspan $40,000. As for Alan Greenspan, President Reagan appointed him chairman of America's central bank, the Federal Reserve. Greenspan was reappointed by Presidents Clinton and George W. Bush. In administration, deregulation continued under Greenspan, and Treasury Secretaries Robert Rubin, the former CEO of the investment bank Goldman Sachs, and Larry Summers, a Harvard economics professor.
The financial sector, Wall Street being powerful, having lobbies, having lots of money, step by step captured the political system, both on the Democratic and the Republican side.
1990s, the financial sector had consolidated into a few gigantic firms, each of them so large that their failure could threaten the whole system. And the Clinton administration helped them grow even larger. In 1998, Citicorp and Travelers merged to form Citigroup, the largest financial services company in the world. The merger violated the Glass-Steagall Act, a law passed after the Great Depression, which prevented banks with consumer deposits from engaging in risky investment banking activities.
It was illegal to acquire Travelers. Greenspan said nothing. The Federal Reserve gave him an exemption for a year, and then they got the law passed.
In 1999, at the urging of Summers and Rubin, Congress passed the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, known to some as the Citigroup Relief Act. It overturned Glass-Steagall and cleared the way for future mergers. Scott Talbot is the chief lobbyist for the Financial Services Roundtable, one of the most powerful groups in Washington, which represents nearly all of the world's largest financial companies.
Are you comfortable with the fact that several of your member companies have engaged in large-scale criminal activity?
You'll have to be specific.
Okay.
First of all, criminal activity shouldn't be accepted.
Since deregulation began, the world's biggest financial firms have been caught laundering money, defrauding customers, and cooking their books again and again and again. Credit Suisse helped funnel money for Iran's nuclear program and for the Aerospace Industries Organization of Iran, which builds ballistic missiles.
Any information that would identify it as Iranian would be removed.
The bank was fined $536 million. Citibank helped funnel $100 million of drug money out of Mexico.
Did you comment that she should, quote, lose any documents connected with the account?
I said that in a kidding manner. It was at the early stages of this. I did not mean it seriously.
Between 1998 and 2003, Fannie Mae overstated its earnings by more than $10 billion.
These accounting standards are highly complex and require determinations over which experts often disagree.
CEO Franklin Raines, who used to be President Clinton's budget director, received over $52 million in bonuses. When UBS was caught helping wealthy Americans evade taxes, they refused to cooperate with the U.S. government.
Would you be willing to supply the names?
If there's a treaty framework...
No treaty framework. You've agreed you participated in a fraud.
But while the companies face unprecedented fines, the investment firms do not have to admit any wrongdoing.
When you're this large and you're dealing with this many products and this many customers, mistakes happen.
The financial services industry seems to have a level of criminality that is, somewhat distinctive. When was the last time that Cisco or Intel or Google or Apple or IBM,
I totally agree with you about high-tech versus financial services, but high-tech...
So how come?
Well, high-tech is a fundamentally creative business where the value generation and the income derives from actually creating something new and different.
Beginning in the 1990s, deregulation and advances in technology led to an explosion of complex financial products called derivatives. Economists and bankers claimed they made markets safer, but instead, they made them unstable.
Since the end of the Cold War, a lot of former physicists, mathematicians decided to apply their skills not on Cold War technology, but on financial markets. And together with investment bankers and hedge
creating
funds,
different weapons.
Absolutely, as Warren Buffett said, weapons of mass destruction.
Regulators, politicians, and business people did not take seriously the threat of financial innovation on the stability of the financial system.
Using derivatives, bankers could gamble on virtually anything. They could bet on the rise or fall of oil prices, the bankruptcy of a company, even the weather. By the late 1990s, derivatives were a $50 trillion unregulated market.
These criminal enterprises are systematically planned by the Confederates to overthrow the American government. Their systems, such as from the record in the War on David, qualifies the active double agents throughout the government, including traitors in Congress and the Senate and others, who have systematically centralized all forces in order to justify their various cases in secret without the publishing of the correct due diligences, so that they can funnel their fraudulent convictions, similar to their illegal wars in the Middle East. Their systems of frauds protect themselves from any security mechanism which would have otherwise rebuffed their criminal damages, such as their Lindsey Graham's character's targeting of David from birth, re-upped when he was a teenager in the fraudulent kangaroo court, generated for the specific purpose of justifying the original free market capitalist contracts owed to David Bowles from the estimate and all of its various layers and applications, was viewed as too stabilizing to the American economy to be allowed to exist, at which point it had to be removed so the American economy could be stabilized, so that they could overthrow the United States public and ignore the civilian government by the barring of the vote. And the systematic application of these terrorists from the fraudulent policies specifically created as a justification to their criminal war against the United States in treason, sedition, and high crimes is for the purpose of their Satanist system, their Satanist society, their hell society. These terrorist insurrectionists are systematically applying economic hitmen in order to engage in terrorism against the American public, such as the subcontracting of Marines and others, in order to systematically engage in the use of war crimes against the American public and other fraudulent expressions of law enforcement who, acting as an occupying military force, supplement the Marine function as economic hitmen in order to remove the securities projected to succeed against their destabilizing forces in order to profit off of their exponential criminal campaigns, at which point the terrorism against David removes the economic insurance, which was fundamental as David's system or network would have been a high insurance society or economy, systematically protecting from the various damages arranged, as David would have been subcontracted with the government and others in order to stop the crash of '08 and then move the employees and the disbursement into other corporations which would have been provided, which would have been amplified by Don Senior Bowles' contract to acquire quantitative easing, which would have advanced the settling of many of the United States liabilities, systematically turning their crime into an exponential boon, supplementing the American success and strength throughout all sectors and security mechanisms, at which point such things as reparations for the traumatized communities by the Confederacy would have been able to begin to dissolve many of the liabilities owed to them by selling them to many of the aspects of the network in the creation of corporations for the Confederacy, at which point the punishment of the terrorists would include the update to the Constitution to sentence them for treason to the Confederate state to work off the liabilities for their crimes, which would have generated the ability of the business owners to receive a normal, legitimate, stabilizing force as the wizard terrorists engaged in their economic frauds and others would systematically be subjugated to pay all of the liabilities for having infected society with their birth.